All right, let's get started. Well, good afternoon or good morning or good evening to those joining us from outside the United States. My name is Anna Rubin, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities, and our partners, the U.S. Mission to the OECD and Accelerator for America. This webinar on inclusive infrastructure, scaling up local investment in the United States, and the accompanying policy brief and case studies are part of the Global Insights Local Innovation Series. And our aim with this series is to bring practical and actionable international lessons from across the OECD to the doorsteps of US state and local actors. And we have a really great lineup of speakers here today with us who are going to help us do just that, including examples from Japan, Australia, and Germany. But before we jump in, just a few quick housekeeping items. First, we encourage you to keep an eye on the chat, where we'll be sharing relevant links to additional resources, such as the policy brief and case studies, amongst others. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function so they don't get lost in the chat. And then finally, just to remind you, this webinar will be recorded in case you want to go back to it or share it later. So to help get us started, we're pleased to have Karen Enstrom, the Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Mission to the OECD with us today. I want to warmly thank Karen and her team for their support in bringing the series to life. And Karen, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you to everyone who is joining us virtually today. A special greeting to our participants from the Champion Mayors Program who are on the call. And a warm welcome as well to our panelists who are joining us today from, I understand, Australia, Japan, and Germany. As Anna said, my name is Karen Enstrom, and I am the Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Mission to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. Our primary mission is to provide policy analysis and coordination support to facilitate U.S. engagement at the OECD, and also to disseminate relevant research products to the public, including to state and local government officials, like many of you on this call. We are very pleased to be partnering with the OECD and with Accelerator for America to bring you today's webinar on inclusive infrastructure and how to scale up local investment. One of the main reasons that we proposed these webinars was because we believed it would be worthwhile to hear how our peers from other countries have discovered new approaches to some of the same problems we face in the United States. And that's where the OECD comes in. As you may already know, the OECD is a group of 38 like-minded countries working together to find policy solutions on tough issues. Its slogan is better policies for better lives. And finding policy solutions to tough issues like how to scale up infrastructure investment is the OECD's bread and butter. So if there is one thing that I would want you to take away from this webinar today, is that the OECD exists and it is a resource for you when it comes to hearing about and understanding good ideas, new approaches, and policies on issues that affect your constituents. This webinar is the first in a series, and in the coming weeks, we will be doing a session on workforce development for green skills, which will also be followed by an additional webinar on revitalizing main streets and downtowns in a post-COVID context. We will be providing more information on how to register for those webinars in the near future. And with that, let me now turn over the program to Dorothée Allen-Dupré, who is the head of the Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance Division at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, Small and Medium Enterprises, Regions and Cities. And she will introduce today's infrastructure-focused policy brief. Thank you.
Many thanks, Karen. Welcome to all, and many thanks to Karen again and to her team at the US Mission to the OECD for their pivotal role in organizing this event. A warm welcome to our esteemed moderator and panelists and to all the participants today. The topic today is a priority for the US, but also for all OECD countries. Local infrastructure investment had significantly declined after the global financial crisis of 2008 in the OECD and was only just recovering before the COVID-19 crisis. The challenge is twofold. Many OECD countries need to increase the amount of local infrastructure investment, especially to address the imperatives linked to the green energy and digital transition. Second, they need to enhance the quality of this investment to develop more resilient and inclusive infrastructure. We work extensively on this topic at the OECD and with the Regional Development Policy Committee of the OECD, and we have summarized some key messages from our work in a policy brief, as Karen mentioned, for today's webinar, and I think you will see the link on the chat. So let me very briefly set the scene for today's discussion by highlighting a few key findings from this policy brief. So I have a few slides to share. So first, zooming on the trends. So from the Hoover down to the Golden Gate Bridge, US infrastructure has been a powerful symbol of the nation. This historical public investment lays the foundation for impressive growth. Today, GDP per capita in the United States is among the highest in the world, with 40 US states having a GDP per capita above the OECD average. But if we look at long-term trends, public investment in the United States has gradually decreased as a percentage of GDP over the last 50 years, from around 4.5% in the 60s to close to 3.3% in 2021. We observe a similar trend in many OECD countries. In the US, investment has been below what is needed to maintain existing infrastructure and to build the new infrastructure required for a changed world. The infrastructure investment gap is more acute in certain states or regions. An assessment by the American Society of Civil Engineers in 2021, prior to the recent federal funding announcements, highlight these regional disparities, with the quality of infrastructure ranging from D in some states to C+. However, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill present a historic opportunity to close this gap, notably for rural America, committing more than $1.57 trillion of federal funding over 10 years. Importantly, analysis of current project announcements show that bipartisan infrastructure bill funding per capita is highest for states that are most in need, which could help to unlock growth in these places and reduce regional disparities. This place-based approach to infrastructure investment holds significant potential to support long-term growth of regions across America. So we will now turn to the challenges and priorities for states and local governments. State and local government have the key role to make the most of the historically significant funding. Across OECD countries, regional and local government are responsible for more than half of total public investment. And this is 55% in the United States, as you can see on this slide. Over many years, the OECD has supported countries, regions, and city government to undertake more productive and effective investment. In our work, we find that local and regional government face common challenges. And to address these challenges, we adopted an OECD Council recommendation on effective public investment 10 years ago with 12 guidelines around coordination, capacity building, and framework conditions. Building on these recommendations, the policy brief highlights 4 priority areas. The first is adopting strategic and inclusive planning approaches. A strategic investment approach means developing an integrated investment pipeline to reflect regional needs, focusing on complementarities across sectors, rather than focusing on individual projects in a disconnected manner. This place-based approach to infrastructure investment is critical to maximize the impact of public investment. Inclusive approaches are equally important. Investment is not something that should be done to the community, but rather with the community. Governments need to gain community buy-in through inclusive planning processes, which can also help to build momentum for project delivery. This can mean applying an equity lens to investment decision or using emerging digital tools to enhance engagement with wider demographics. Today, we will hear the case of Hachioji City in Japan, which showcases how utilizing 3D city models and augmented reality may enhance local public engagement. The second priority is enhancing coordination across local governments. Across OECD countries, we have seen that local government boundaries do not always match the scale of functional planning areas. These problems can be more or less pronounced. In France, for example, the average size of a municipality is just around 2,000 compared to over 9,000 people in the United States. Shared responsibility across levels of government means establishing vertical and horizontal coordination mechanisms. Today, we will hear from the Hamburg metropolitan region, which has implemented new approaches to coordinate spatial planning and investment across 4 federal states in Germany. The third priority is building local public sector investment capacity. Smaller government, in particular, can find it very challenging to attract and retain skilled public workers, which can hinder their ability to secure and deliver projects. Distressed and small municipalities have less capacity and face absorption challenges for large competitive grants. Building capacity takes time, but can be supported through targeted initiatives. This can include establishing centers of excellence that pool infrastructure expertise, developing dedicated training programs for local authorities, such as those provided by Accelerator for America, and providing employment pathways for underrepresented groups. An example of a center of excellence is in Infrastructure Ontario, a provincial agency in Canada, which provides a range of services to local government, including for procurement and public-private partnerships. And finally, the fourth priority is to identify and address potential market capacity constraints. As the level of investment is increasing, demand for labor, materials, and equipment will also increase. We will later hear from Australia, where the amount of public investment has increased by 25% over the last years, contributing to a shortfall of more than 200,000 public infrastructure workers. Anticipating future market conditions can help to support effective delivery of the infrastructure pipeline. I'm sure Steve would be happy to elaborate on this further later today and explain a bit the infrastructure market capacity report developed by Infrastructure Australia. So these are 4 priorities to keep in mind. And I would like now to hand over to Ross Van Dongen, Director of Infrastructure and Intergovernmental Affairs from Accelerator for America, to moderate the panel session. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you so much, Dorothea. It's very much an honor to be with all of you today. It's incredible to be hosting this conversation with local leaders and state leaders across 4 continents. I'm very honored to be with OECD and your entire network this afternoon here from the nation's capital in America, here in Washington, D.C. As the name of our organization suggests, Accelerator for America, we are focused on assisting U.S. cities with projects that range across sectors, namely, though, focused on helping local leaders, mayors, and their teams to provide economic mobility opportunities for their most vulnerable populations, their most vulnerable neighborhoods and communities. We do that through a few different ways, wearing several different hats. But most recently, over the last 2.5 years of the Biden-Harris administration here in the United States, we've been really focused on helping mayors transition from a time of federal scarcity to a time of federal largesse. As many of you are aware and may know, the Biden-Harris administration has passed a number of very significant pieces of legislation here in the States: the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, that have given local leaders unprecedented opportunity to access an abundance of federal funds and really bring new investment into their most in-need communities. But with that comes several challenges for our local leaders. Over the last several decades, our local government systems have been hollowed out, leaving mayors short-staffed, even before these pieces of legislation came to bear. And now they have to help their staff sift through thousands of pages of policy. Think about the backlog of projects they have, sometimes ranging in the tens to hundreds of projects that they are waiting funds for, and figure out how to appropriately match those funds to the existing programs they have. They also require an incredible amount of coordination, not only with their regional partners, but also their state and federal partners for other sources of funding. The bipartisan infrastructure law in particular has the bulk of its funds coming in the form of formula grants, which directly to the states that require our local leaders to coordinate closely with their governors and their teams to see about where that money may trickle down. So it's very, very complicated navigation for our local leaders in this moment in time, though they are very excited to be obviously leading their local governments at this time. So we're honored as a nonprofit organization to offer pro bono services to these mayors in their efforts to do so. I see as I'm looking through the attendees that we have here, a number of mayors that we've worked with, Mayor Kelly in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Mayor Tito Brown in Youngstown, Ohio. Hello to you, mayors. I'm very happy to see you here with us today. And I'm sure there's numerous others that I'm excited to get introduced to later on. But for the purposes of today, I want to make sure that we're able to move into the case studies that were alluded to earlier today. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one here. There's going to be 4 to 5 minutes of a presentation on the specific projects that they're working at in their communities, in their countries, and then we'll have a little bit back and forth for a couple minutes after that to offer follow-up. So please, as Anna mentioned at the top, utilize that Q&A function. Let us know about the questions you have for our panelists, and we'll do our best to work those into the discussion section here throughout today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sachio Muto, who is the Director of Urban Policy Division of the City and Bureau of Hachioji City, Japan, in the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure for Transport and Tourism in Japan. Mr. Muto, please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And so I'd like to explain the case study of the Hachioji City and other 3D city model project called Project Plateau, produced by our ministry. And I'd like to explain what is going on right now. And my name is, I'm Sachio Muto, and I'm director of the Urban Policy Division, but I'm specifically doing the digitalization issue and international relations. And our bureau is dealing with the urban planning and urban policy. Next slide, please. Please. Okay. So, okay. Yes, this slide. So Project Plateau is the 3-year-old project, and it is enacted in 2020. And it is the 3D urban city model, and that will serve the infrastructure development and also the digitalization of the other smart planning, that kind of thing. And it is the model, but it has some kind of the attributes of the shape of the the building or other characteristics. So the model can contain some information, including the building age and the usage, that kind of the attributes. Next slide, please. So this is the basic idea of the developing the 3D city model by Plateau. And in Japanese urban planning law, we require to the municipalities to have the urban planning basic survey in at least in every 5 years. So they have the data of the planning of urban planning area, and including the information of the building and also the maps. So those data is actually it kind of has a long history, and they have the data like pen and paper, and recently a PDF and a spreadsheet. But we come up to combine those data into the 3D city model, utilizing the aerial survey result, and those have some kind of the 3D data. So they have a geometry. So we combine into the 3D city models that will make our project Plateau possible. Next slide, please. So I'd like to explain about this done in Hachioji City right now. And Hachioji City is 40 kilometers west of the center of Tokyo. It is suburb, but it has 500 more than 500,000 people in this city. And so there's a kind of long history of development over there. And recently, they had the issue of the relocation of the aged facilities of waste management. And starting from fiscal year 2022, they start a resident workshop. And they consider how to relocate a facility by 3D city model. Next slide, please. So this is the characteristics of their workshops. So they hold a workshop, but the right upper hand side picture shows what is going on, and it is actually the participants can actually move the planning, and they argue and they touch and they move the 3D shape of the future relocation, and they actually can the participants can actually see what is going to be built in the next new facilities. That is the left lower side picture, and they can they have the walk tour of the 3D city model. Next slide, please. So this is the result of the experimental workshop of the in Hachioji City. And demographics of the participants for usual project is in Japan is usually older elderly people, and there may be some opposing people of the project, but when we use the AR and augmented reality and XR technology, the demographic for the participants in the workshop is it varying, and they say that the workshop is actually more straightforward than the ordinary public workshop of this style. So we think that those kind of the usage of digital technology is useful for planning the infrastructure projects. So next slide, please. So I can show the other. It is done in the other city called Hiroshima City, and so animation, please. So this is the experiment of the building another sidewalk for in the center of the city, and it is difficult for the ordinary style to have the actual implementation of the building of sidewalk. But if you have the AR and XR technology, you can implement on the laptop. So that's what is going done in one of the city. So maybe probably time's up, and so just a short animation, please. So this is the technology called tangible interface. So you can move the shape of the city by kind of moving the tangible object in the right hand side, so that they can use this technology to the workshop to argue what is built or what is the appropriate shape of the street. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That is absolutely fascinating, Sachio. The capability to interact with projects that are in development, it's so exciting. I'm sure a number of mayors here would love to have access to that technology. And obviously, while these things may seem like future tech, things that are going to be coming years down the line that we don't quite have to worry about yet, obviously, as you know, as you're interacting with day-to-day with residents of these communities, this is very much here. This is very much happening right now. But do you think that we're going to reach a point sometime soon where digital models of urban design are going to be really integrated into infrastructure planning projects in a much more common way? And can you talk about how you think that's going to come to fruition in the near term?
Yes, so the first thing we should do is to include those kind of the usage of the digital technology into the traditional kind of the process of the project making. So actually, our ministry have lots of the project, including roads and other river levees, those kind of thing. But there's kind of the established scheme of the planning and implementing those projects. So there's many ways and many experience or history of having those workshops and other public opinion gathering. But we currently, our task is to coming up what is the best way to implement those technology in the process of the traditional project making. I think it's not easy, but I think that's what we should do in next couple of years.
I think something that you said that really stuck out to me is how is some feedback you've received from residents and community individuals who have participated. I think for many of our local leaders here in the States, I know that community engagement, that part of a project, while be incredibly important, can sometimes be so frustrating to kind of convey what your intentions are for a project and how that's taken in. Is there any highlights or anecdotes that stick out to you as particular instances where a community leader or resident that participated had some feedback that really helped to a community approach a certain project?
Yes. So I think it is a very good question, and we should explore that aspects. But what we are having right now about the feedback is that when you have those kinds of the technology and the thing you can maneuver in the workshop is something different from what is done in the traditional workshop. I mean that in traditional workshop, the experts or the officials in the municipalities is explaining what should be done and what is the municipality's plan. And so the reaction of people or in the workshop is to kind of like commenting, opposing, or criticizing the intent of the plan of the municipalities.
Right.
But as I show in the slide, if the participants can actually on the side of the coming up the plan and arguing and the touching the object, those kind of things, the attitude of the participants actually have changed us a lot. So they need to coming up the better idea by themselves.
Right.
I would say that if we can implement those kind of the aspects in the traditional infrastructure procedure,
Yeah.
that may change the way of thinking and the way of attitude of the participants. So that is it is the Plateau project is 3-year project, and we are still in the experimental stage. But the thing we have is kind of promising, and so we would like to expand our capabilities or possibilities in infrastructure planning.
Great. That's awesome. One last quick question for you. I know we got to move on here. I know our friends in Orlando, Florida, the Orlando Economic Partnership, have a very famous digital twin that they've started to integrate. But for a lot of communities, taking on this level of technical integration is probably very intimidating. What are some key tools or key things that a community that wants to pursue further digital integration or technology like this should really think about before starting down this pathway? What do they need to know?
Yeah, it is a very good question again, and we are still kind of struggling to implement those things in a local community. But we have the plan of implementing those technology in 500 cities in next 3 years, and we have already done about 200 cities to have those kind of models. So the thing we are right now is to have more lighter, more 3D city model. Currently we are building according to the international standard called City GML, and we are doing kind of the technology similar to the GIS, but the GIS is already a little bit heavy in terms of the requirement of the the capability of the laptop, but the 3D City model is heavier. So you need to have the better laptop, and you need to have a little bit of funding. So what we are doing in next couple of months or this year is to have more lighter or more implementable by the local authority to have such kind of the urban planning and kind of flood evacuation or other possibilities. So that's exactly what you are pointing out is the important thing we are currently doing.
Well, thank you so much for navigating that. Please do a full write-up on your findings and your reports as the first kind of national foray into this. Will, I'm sure, be able to scale and replicate, take those best practices and try and implement them elsewhere around the world. So thank you, Mr. Muto, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Our next presenter is going to focus on coming from us from Hamburg, Germany, Mr. Jakob Richter today, the head of Hamburg Metropolitan Regional Office in Germany, to speak about something that every single local official, state official, every elected official loves to talk about, which is enhanced coordination across different levels of government. So I won't say any more than that. Mr. Richter, please, it is off to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. In Hamburg, at least it's evening, or hello, everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jakob Richter. I'm head of the office of the Hamburg Metropolitan Region. Actually, there are 12 metropolitan regions in Germany, e.g. Berlin, Munich, Frankfurt, and of course, Hamburg. In addition to my duties here in Hamburg, I'm also the spokesperson for these 12 German metropolitan regions. Next slide, please. Germany, like the US, is a federally organized country. Hamburg is the second largest city in Germany. The city of Hamburg is a state in its own right. The Hamburg Metropolitan Region extends far beyond the borders of the city. 4 states, 16 counties, 3 independent cities, 11 chambers of industry and commerce, and the Federation of the German Trade Unions are part of our organization. The metropolitan region has a radius of around about 120 to 150 kilometers around Hamburg City Hall, 5 million inhabitants, 1.7 million jobs, GDP of approximately 167 billion euros. We, the Office of the Metropolitan Region, coordinate the cooperation across the jurisdiction borders of these various institutions. I have been told that we are kind of institutionalized council of government like those that exist in the US. I'm not sure whether that is true, but it could be similar. Next slide, please. In 2019, we were the first and still are the only institution in Germany to conduct a so-called territorial review together with the OECD. This is a report of about 200 to 300 pages in which the strengths, but also the weaknesses of the regions are presented. You can still access our territorial review on the OECD website. The OECD has told us that we are institutionally wise very fragmented and therefore cannot fully exploit our strengths. This applies in particular to the area of joint planning of infrastructure. As a result of this territorial review, we have developed and implemented 17 joint projects across state borders, the so-called future agenda of Hamburg Metropolitan Region. These included, for example, a joint innovation strategy, a joint tourism strategy, construction site coordination, and Germany's largest network of cycle lanes. Next slide, please. However, it was particularly important to us to reduce fragmentation in regional planning. Only with joint planning can we succeed in implementing major infrastructure projects across state borders. As in Germany, there's a wide variety of stakeholders and various levels of legislations are involved in infrastructure planning. the federal government, the states, the counties, the municipalities, NGOs, and private companies. In Hamburg metropolitan region alone, there are 14 different regional and state levels of development planning. You can imagine how difficult it is to plan infrastructure together with such a structure. That's why we launched a major joint informal planning process in 2020. We in our organization unite all important partners in the formal structure of our organization. That's why we have succeeded in convincing all our partners to engage in an informal planning process within our formal structure. So we are giving the framework for a big informal planning process. We are the formal framework of informal planning. Next slide, please. How did we manage to make this informal plan effective? First of all, we have taken the appropriate political decisions to tackle the process. This was easier than we expected because of the basis of the territorial review of the OECD. The political pressure was high to do something. However, it was clear to us that informal planning can only lead to results that are ultimately recognized by everyone through a comprehensive, integrative, and inclusive planning process. At start, we conducted a design competition between two planning agencies who developed different visions and ideas for the region. We selected the best ideas of both drafts through an intergovernmental review process. We developed a new draft with the best ideas from the competitions. And again, the stakeholder participated in a review of this draft. The presentation of the new draft was in December 2023. Currently, our members are working on written feedback and are in the last stages of intergovernmental review of the draft. Because of the binding nature of this informal process, I'm very sure that this draft will be approved by our regional board of directors in the next month. Next slide, please. What is our regional growth plan all about? It has 4 levels: 1 on open space, 2nd on transportation, 3rd land use, 4th economic development. Of course, transportation is the one where we have the big problems of infrastructure. For example, we have agreed to develop a network of joint regional train routes. They are, of course, based on existing lines, but some do not yet exist and others need to be upgraded. On this informal plan, we are able to provide budget for this and obtaining it from the federal government. It will be much easier to obtain money from the federal government joining together in an informal planning process. Of course, to be clear, an informal plan that has been developed in a formal setting does not guarantee that infrastructure will be built exactly as it was developed in the plan. But we are sure that without such a joint plan and without such a joint planning process, without being integrative and inclusive in this process with the various levels of administrations, with NGOs, with private partners, at least in Germany, there is no way to tackle such infrastructure projects. So you need this informal projects before you start with the real plan or with the formal planning. We are therefore confident that we are on the right track with our regional growth strategy, and we are confident that this will help us to bring in the big infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. This is the last one. First of all, thank you very much for having your attention. I hope I have been able to introduce to you our way of thinking how infrastructure planning should be handled in the first step. But now for something really completely different. From 9th to 12th May in 2024, Hamburg Harbor will celebrate the 835th birthday. 35 years is the harbor old. This is celebrated with a big party. If you happen to be in Germany, you are invited to join us. Will be really great. So this is also infrastructure which shaped our city for 800 years. And hopefully we will build with our plan infrastructure which lasts also for 800 years, or for 835 years to be exact. Now I'm open to your questions.
Well, thank you for that generous invitation, and I hope some of us here are able to attend that party. That sounds fantastic. I think most of us in the United States are hoping that any of our systems, any of our processes last 835 years. So just generally, congrats to Hamburg on that. Thank you for that presentation, Jakob. Really, really fascinating. I think one question I have is how widespread are these sorts of structures in Germany generally? Is Hamburg really kind of revolutionizing this space as far as informal planning? Or are there other models that have taken shape or have been replicated across the country?
Yeah, it is. As I've told you, I'm also the spokesperson for the 11 other German metropolitan region. It is in a way unique. Of course, there are also visions of spatial planning, but not for such huge areas over 4 states. The question here is not doing this in one state. That's not really easy, to be perfectly clear. That's very difficult, but what the real challenge was here, that we had to do this in 4 states with 4 different spatial planning laws. Actually, around about half of our metropolitan regions are over state borders. So they have the same problems, and none of them have did this yet.
So I want to dig into that piece a little bit, because I think you should be incredibly proud of yourselves. Everyone involved should be incredibly proud of themselves about the success you've already had so far. 17 projects across 4 state boundaries is incredible. What sort of planning and negotiating went into developing this informal framework for negotiation? And what sort of cooperation needed to kind of be presented to the table first to make this successful?
First of all, we are 25 years old, or 30 years old. There is a long tradition of working together over the Hamburg city-state border. So yeah, that's the basis of what we are doing. You have to create trust among the partners, and you have to have an organization like we are. We are only a small office with some 20 persons, but they are all trusting us. They are all they are controlling us, of course. They are giving us budget. And the main thing for doing this was bringing the OECD in and having this territorial review. You need to have advice from the outside. Politicians have to listen to. It's not that they don't want to. Of course they want to, but there has to be some kind of push to bring everybody together. And that's what was achieved with this OECD territorial review. And then we made our own projects out of it. Actually, something what the OECD told us we weren't able to establish. Other things we did a little bit different. Other things we did almost as they told us. So that's the normal political process.
Got it. And something you mentioned that I think is really pertinent as well is that, this informal planning process and the binding nature of that informal planning process makes it easier for you to receive federal investment. I can imagine why, but I'd love to get a little more detail on that. I mean, how do you think this form of cooperation can really improve spatial planning and infrastructure investment decisions as they move through these processes?
Yeah, that's quite easy because we had all the partners in. And of course, they're going to lobby for their projects. If you agree to do this and you need the federal money, that's usual in Germany. You always need the federal money, and there are some projects with local money and there are some with state money. But if you want to convince the federal level to do something, you have to plan it together. And the really big projects, there's also a federal plan, and you have to lobby to come into this federal plan. And if you're doing this over state borders, it's easier. If it is only one state government who wants to lobby for its own projects, the federal is not as easily convinced if let's say it's 4. I guess it's obvious.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jacob, for sharing that information with us today. Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Our last presenter today, we're going to shift over to Australia. We're going to hear from Mr. Steve Brogan, Chief Policy and Research for Infrastructure Australia. So Steve, please take it away.
Thanks, Ross. G'day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice and early on a Wednesday morning. I do want to talk to you about how Australia has handled a significant ramp up in infrastructure investment over the last particularly 3 years. So to do that, I'm going to use these slides that describe to you our infrastructure market capacity program and reporting. It's something that was asked of us by what we call our national cabinet. So the Prime Minister convenes a forum of all the state premiers across Australia. And that group requested that infrastructure market conditions are monitored by Infrastructure Australia. And I've got the link there on these slides, which I believe will be distributed. But feel free, as I'm talking, if you so desire, to Google the program Infrastructure Market Capacity Australia, and have a look on at the report itself. So moving into the slides, let me tell you about Infrastructure Australia. It was established in 2008, so we're about just over 15 years old. Established by the Infrastructure Minister of the day, who was a man by the name of Mr. Anthony Albanese, who is the current Australian Prime Minister. The Australian Prime Minister took office in May of 2022, and throughout that period of ensuing period of taking office, so the first 6 months in the seat, the Prime Minister and the Infrastructure Minister commissioned an independent review of Infrastructure Australia and its functions. And so that came out at the end of 2022. And in the year of 2023, we've been going about implementing those recommendations, which essentially say that we are set up as an organisation to give advice to the Australian government as our key customer. We are paid for by the Australian government. We do 2 core functions. We analyse and assess the merits of a particular nationally significant infrastructure proposal coming from states and territories who are seeking funding from the Commonwealth Government. And we also analyse data to, I guess, as I said before, monitor market conditions along with long-term auditing and planning of the suitability of infrastructure. So that's the policy function that I lead. And given where today's theme of discussion is, it's worth calling out that Infrastructure Australia has no responsibility for funding. We are all we're in the game of advice, and hopefully that advice gets listened to by the decision makers. So moving on to the next slide, just to give you a bit of a scene setting around how the government, 3 levels of government work across Australia. So the federal government looks after what is the kind of primary income source of taxes. And we've got the state and territory governments who are primarily, and there's 8 of them, they're primarily responsible for infrastructure. So to give you a sense, probably 25% of public infrastructure funding comes from the Australian government, whereas the 3/4 of the bulk comes from the states and territories. And then we also have 537 local governments who are responsible for infrastructure as well, and particularly maintaining local roads. That's probably the biggest cost that they bear. The Australian government, however, does try to support local government infrastructure through various funding programs. And in November of last year, a review was undertaken of the way that the Australian government's infrastructure investment pipeline is structured. And one of the recommendations that came out of that review was to increase funding in local road infrastructure. So there are a couple of programs that were actually bolstered as part of that review. So there is a strong link there from Australian government through to state and territory governments in terms of co-funding big nationally significant and state significant initiatives. But then there's also that link from Australian government straight through to local government to fund particularly important areas such as local roads. Moving ahead, the purpose of today is to talk about our market capacity monitoring. So it's a data and analytics-based product which takes all the state and territory infrastructure pipelines and understands the demand forecasts over a 5-year outlook period. What we do with that forecast is, and that represents, by the way, through various other data sources beyond state and territory governments, we're able to look at 74% of construction right across Australia. And we're working in 2024, so this is our 4th year of reporting, to expand that scope of our demand analysis to 100% of the construction sector. But we have a knowledge of 3/4 of every dollar that's being spent over the next 5 years in construction. We then break down that demand based on typical resource profiles for projects of particular like-for-like types. So hospitals, we have a cost schema that we apply that forward-looking outlook to. We have the same for schools. We have the same for airport runways. We have the same for rail track. So we kind of have this knowledge that is not perfect, and it's not going to marry up to any particular infrastructure project plan, but it's a perfect tool for understanding the landscape of demand across the country, that says we need this many engineers, or we need this much steel, or we need this much concrete, and that is broken down to the resource level. We have 80 resources in our tool, and we understand that demand for the next 5 years. Then on the supply side, we talk to industry about manufacturing capabilities and outputs. We talk about with the Australian Bureau of Statistics data that's available, we actually are able to calculate worker shortages, and that was mentioned right at the top of the talk, that Australia has identified 200,000 workers needed. The shortfall is that big to deliver on the current ambitions of governments across the country. We also talk to industry to understand their confidence in delivery. And currently what we're hearing from industry is that they're navigating a profitless boom, is how they describe it. So moving on to the next slide, just to show you the way that investment has scaled up in recent times. And these lines essentially represent the dollars invested in infrastructure, both historically, but also with a forward-looking outlook. So that scale on the bottom goes from 2018 to essentially 2028. And what we're trying to do with this view here that you're seeing, which we've published in our report, is just to show how, through our advice of recent reports, particularly the 2022 report, where we advised that federal government could play an active role in smoothing out the demand to really kind of manage the growth that's needed a little bit better, so that we're not seeing so many projects go over in terms of cost and time. And so on this chart, what's depicted here is the ambition or demand in the red line is what state and territory governments were saying in early 22. And then 1 year later, through the actions taken by decision makers, we're seeing that demand smooth out as projects that were sort of rethought, went back for further planning, were moved to the right, and a much more manageable demand pipeline. And this report, at its core, is an economic report, which is really about understanding supply and demand constraints. So from a demand perspective, Australian government is taking active steps, working with state and territory governments to smooth that out. And then just one last slide before I hand back to Ross, just to say that, and we can walk through the animation here, just click it a couple more times, that we've made 14 recommendations in the report, and those areas that we're talking about are around continuing this active demand management that I just spoke of. Just click through a couple more times if you don't mind. Also around, in terms of supply side, on the labour side, we made some very specific recommendations about how to bolster the workforce, and then similar for the non-labour, so supply of materials and so on. And then finally, we have a productivity issue in our country, although we do hear that that's fairly consistent in many other countries around the world, where as a sector, construction sector lags behind other vertical industries in terms of productivity growth. And so we've made recommendations about how governments can do more with what they've got. So that's the end of my formal talk. So I'll hand back to Ross and just see whether there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think this is a really key topic for everyone in the room, especially in the United States. I think you can't go a day in the infrastructure world without talking about capacity constraints or being over your bandwidth, as it were. So what are some of those capacity strengths that have the largest variation or have caused the most sort of conversation within your office? I mean, obviously, we talk about the supply chain a lot here in the United States and globally. The labor shortage is something that we talk about a lot here as well. So can you talk a little bit more about those and what kind of has the biggest impacts and variation day to day?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you, so certainly industry call out the labor force is the most difficult constraint to deal with. But drilling into that a little bit further, it's those resources that they're required throughout the life of a project, but they're really important upfront in the planning phase of a project. And that's the likes of the engineers, the scientists, the architects, and that's where our shortfalls are greatest. And so a lot of our recommendations about how we bolster the ability to tap into existing trained people who can work in this space, that where perhaps our requirements for entry into infrastructure are particularly strict. So, for example, requiring 9 years of training and study, where perhaps in other sectors, similar disciplines might require only 6 years of study and training. And this is something that our analysis has teased out. And another good example in our country is we have a lot of people moving to our country with relevant skills and qualifications from their nation or the place they're coming from. And so we have a job to do now that they're living in our country to actually ensure that they're employable in our country. And so we have a lot of migrant engineers who are not necessarily out of work, but not working as an engineer. They might be driving Uber for us.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Real quick, last answer to this last question here. We did get a question in the Q&A function from Krishna Shrivastava. Steve, the core issue raises the question as to material shortages due to lack of adequate sites or environmental restrictions. I don't know if you can just do a 30-second quick answer to that question.
I can, because we did spotlight this in our report with respect to quarried material. So I'll just pick on that. So yeah, the lead times for approvals of new sites or extensions of sites are up to 10 years. So we spotlight in our report, one of the state governments has done a really good job of creating a role within their jurisdiction of what they call a quarry approvals coordinator, someone whose job it is day in, day out to ensure that state of Australia, Victorian quarries are at the reserve levels that the infrastructure sector needs from them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. Sorry to cut your time short a little bit here, but the top of the hour snuck up on us. I want to just thank Steve, as well as Jacob and Sachio for participating today. Thank OECD very, very much for including Accelerator for America, and for all of you for attending. Keep an eye out for the next seminar, the Workforce Development Seminar, coming up very shortly. And please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the OECD staff you heard from or myself at AFA if you have any follow-up questions. Really, really appreciate your time. Have a good one.